and gentlemen, welcome to Black's Easy Club reunion. I started to work at Black's in 1975. I worked in the basement for Lou Krause in the receiving. I also helped do the chargebacks to send back to the cosmetic companies. Then later I started in helping to transfer the clothes and merchandise to the other stores at Crossroads, College Square, and the home store in Black Hawk Village. Then later when our store closed, I went to Crossroads and worked in customer service.
My name's Dory Ressler, and I started in 1966, and I was the first Estee Lauder lady to work right here around the corner. Worked here until the store closed, and then later was transferred over to the Crossroads store, working in the men's department first, and then finally got back into cosmetics.
Now I would like to introduce a special lady who is here to help out and be our greeter tonight. She also helped to start the Easy Club. Please give a warm welcome to Dora Alderman. She's another one of our very nice success stories. She is here to entertain us with the piano tonight, but she is also part of the Potter's Hearing Aid Service. Please give a warm welcome to Mary Potter. James Black started his business in Iowa. Back in 1881, he moved to America, and then he came there from Ireland. He lived in Ohio first, and then he moved to Gladbrook, Iowa. From there he moved to Marshalltown, where he went into business with his brother. Then he moved back to Ireland for 7 years before he came back to Waterloo and went into business in 1892. He started out with a stock of only $4,500 and 3 employees. Back in those days, they unloaded the freight outside the door, on the sidewalk outside the store, and unpacked it there and took it in to be sold. He formed the James Black Dry Goods Company in 1902, where he had the finest, most complete department store in the Midwest. I've heard many stories about how very strict he was. One lady told me that no matter how you felt, you had to stand up all the time because he only had one stool in the whole place. Maybe being so strict was one reason he was so successful. Back in 1934, there was a grocery store in the basement during the Depression. He had several small stores there. Was also a grocery store where Adams is now. There was a furniture store where Ed Smith worked in the 1950s. There was also a tea room here in the 8th floor, and where they had many special events, and had a coffee shop in the basement. There was a home store, a casual shop in Black Hawk Village, and also stores in College Square and Crossroads malls. Mr. Black started a family of employees years ago, extended out through the Cedar Valley. We are very fortunate to be a part of that family. And speaking of family, we are very honored to have with us tonight a granddaughter of James Black. Just happens to be here. Would you please give a warm welcome to Sally Davis. This gentleman is one of our Easy Club honorees. He has been with Black's for 38 years. He was the controller, and he is a gentleman that we are all proud of. Let's have a warm welcome for Dick Shane.
Happy to be here tonight. See a lot of people that I remember, some I don't remember, but I'm gradually getting acquainted. I was asked to tell a few things that happened when I was here. I started in 1933, and one of the first things I remember is how we used to get in flowers for Memorial Day, and the shipment would come in by express real early in the morning, and all the men in the store would come down and have breakfast about 5 o'clock up in the tea room, and then help unpack the flowers. And we'd put them in bundles of a dozen, I guess. There'd be peonies and roses and carnations, and then we'd gradually bring them all down here to the main floor and lay them out on tables in the aisles. And the girls that worked down here would sell them all day practically. There'd be a big rush in the morning to get in and get the flowers. Another thing I remember is taking inventory. We used to take inventory when the store was open, and we'd count the merchandise, the employees would count the merchandise, then every time they sold something they'd have to check it off. It wasn't the most accurate way, so then eventually we went to taking it after the store closed, and sometimes we'd work till 1 or 2 in the morning. Then we got to taking it in the morning before the store opened. And I don't know, Jim and Lawrence will probably tell you later how we did it after that. And let's see, I was thinking of, we had a round table in the tea room where some of the men ate at noon, and that was quite a favorite spot. About a dozen would eat up there. I had a card, but I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is. We had sidewalk days periodically. We had great big cash registers, national cash registers that weighed, I don't know, 200 or 300 pounds, I guess. We used to put 1 or 2 of those out on the sidewalk, and we'd have to move them out there. We finally got a cart made that we could leave them on and use a hydraulic jack to move them out there. I remember the Christmas parties. We used to have them in the tea room, but they got too big for the tea room, so then we started going to the tavern on the green, and we'd have entertainment. And I remember Clark Ness and Hal Croak and some of the other people at Cliff Dolan, I guess, that put on entertainment, and a lot of us got to take part in it. And we had a choir at Christmas time. Doc Nielsen, the optometrist who had a lease department up on the balcony, was the director. We used to come up here on this balcony and sing over the railing to the people down here. Not much selling was going on during that time. We had picnics, and I remember one time going out to Rotary Reserve, and Roger Muller, one of the buyers, was a Rotarian. We liked to go out there and do the cooking in advance of the picnic. And then we had dinner and played bingo and had other games. And one year, Bonnie Kolak sang for us, and it's the first time I ever heard the song, "This land is your land, this land is my land." I guess that's long enough for me to talk, but I remember the main thing was the people in the store and our relationship, which was more like a family, I guess you'd say. I'll turn it over to somebody else now.
Our next speaker is retired president of the Chamber of Commerce and used to be the controller, Jim Lawrence. Worked there from 69 to 78. Please give a warm welcome for Jim Lawrence.
Thank you very much. Dick, you remember, or you mentioned you started here in 1933. I was only 2 years old at that time. And what bothers me even more, you look younger than I do. Waterloo first came to the Lawrence family's attention when we were in Muskegon, Michigan at that time. I started with Allied in Jackson, Michigan, was then transferred to Muskegon. And blacks joined the David Valenti group as one of the stores in that group. And if I remember correctly, that was known as the F group, or Group F. And we finally called it F Troop, if you remember that TV show that was on many years ago, because we thought we resembled that in a lot of ways. Our first visit to Waterloo, oh, by the way, I back up just a second. After Waterloo joined, we really didn't know anything about Waterloo, about Iowa at that point. But we always kind of kidded. Waterloo, the only thing that really stuck, of course, was what happened to Napoleon in Waterloo many, many years ago. And I guess we kind of related that maybe that was something here. So we always said, well, if you mess up in your job, if you don't watch out, you're going to get transferred to Waterloo. Well, the time came when I had the opportunity to come out here to interview for the job. And my dear wife was here this evening. Every night when I come home from work, she'd always say, "What's new?" And I said, well, I do have some news. It appears like we're going to have a chance to interview for a job in another store. She said, where? And I said, guess. She said, Waterloo. I said, you're right. That's where we're going. So we came to Waterloo, and I can remember yet, just like it was yesterday, and this was 33 some years ago, that we walked through the front doors. This was on a Saturday. And if Art Christman could see this number of people on the first floor that are here this evening, back then he was a very happy person. But we walked through the front doors, and the first thing I noticed was the balcony. And the people seated in the chairs on the balcony looking over at all the activity that was going on in the main floor. And that stuck in my mind as something that was truly unique. And we found that blacks in Waterloo was a unique operation. This was different than any other store we'd been in. As Dick mentioned, it was family, it was tradition, it was part of Waterloo. There was a lot of feeling, and still feeling today, about the fact that this is the Blacks building. The Blacks Sky Room was something that was a tradition in this community that probably has never been replaced. But it was a great place, and it's something that truly has stuck with us for all these years. I was fortunate when I came here because I came from a much smaller store that didn't have branch operations, and at that time, of course, there was a downtown store, there was a home store at Blackhawk Village and a casual shop at Blackhawk Village, but a few months after we got here, Crossroads was going to open. The casual shop was moving from Blackhawk Village to College Square, so there was a lot going on. It was a very, very heavy area. And this is one of the reasons that the change was made for me to come out and relieve Dick Shane from some of his responsibilities for all the things that were going on. And I was very blessed to have a great staff of people to work with. Lorraine Nelson, who you're going to hear from in a little bit, was one of the people. We also had Lyle Parker, and I'm sure you all remember Lyle. Lyle was an amazing individual. I've never known anybody, anywhere, that could walk as fast as Lyle Parker walked. And if you ever saw Lyle going down the street, you had to look quick or you were going to miss him. And I can still remember we had tile floors up on the second floor where our office was at that time, and the second floor over in the Park Avenue side. And I could always tell when Lyle was coming to visit me in my office. I could tell by the pace of the steps coming down through the aisles. But Lyle did a great job. Art Christman, who was the manager of the store at that time, Art was a great person and a man that I truly admired and respected. And he always had his tours, if you remember, about 2 to 3 times a day through the stores, looking at the cash registers to see what the total was at that point. And you could set your watch by the time that Art was going to make his tour. But I'll never forget the one instance on the Friday after Thanksgiving, the beginning of the Christmas season, the busiest time of the year, in the downtown store as it was in all stores. the city decided to close the parking lot across Park Avenue to do some remodeling on the telephone office. Art had an emergency meeting in his office with all the executive staff, and we were instructed to phone, go over, sit in the mayor's office, do whatever was necessary to make sure that that parking lot was going to be open, because that was not going to be closed during this time of the year. And we got the job done. Some other people, Dick, of course, as operations person until he retired. Great staff of people. Bill Dirks, who I saw here this evening, and Bill, I'll never forget how you enjoyed those cold winter nights when we went off uninterruptible gas and you had to come down at 2 in the morning when it was 20 below zero and the wind blowing to switch over to oil. Those were something that you thoroughly enjoyed, so much so that you retired and moved to California. Dick mentioned the doctor's table upstairs, and that was always a treat to go up in the Sky Room and have lunch. And believe me, the Sky Room, that's something I still hear about, the tradition that that facility had, and people that grew up in this community and look forward to having the smorgasbord on Saturday night in the Sky Room. That was a true tradition. So this store had tradition. It had something that, as I said before, that was something that we had never run into in any other facility. And it was a real occasion. We came to Waterloo in 1978 when Donaldson's was taking over the management of the store. My position was being eliminated, and I was transferred to Springfield, Ohio, to another Allied unit. But as a family, we wanted to stay here. We loved this community, and this is where we wanted to remain. And I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to go to work for the Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. And believe you me, that was the best career move I ever made. It was a great opportunity and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. I see that Greg Stiebel is going to be speaking here a little bit. Greg was a buyer, I think, in the men's department, if I remember correctly. And Greg had one problem in his job. He was hired as a buyer. Somebody forgot to tell him he was supposed to sell that stuff after he bought it. And I can still see Greg running up and down the aisles with that marked down book in his hand, trying to sell that merchandise that he bought. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I thank the folks at Midtown, to the Nelsons and the Grangers for hosting this great event, and for the Easy Club, who have done a great job.
Our next speaker is another of our success stories. He is now with the Community National Bank. We would like to have you give a warm welcome to Greg Stiebel.
Good evening. I talked to Jim Lawrence here a few weeks ago, and we're going to say, what are you going to say? And I said, I don't know. What are you going to say? He doesn't know, etc., etc. And strange as it seems, I have a little story on Lyle Parker too, which I'll get into, so that's kind of coincidental. I think the first thing we ought to do tonight is to thank the committee that put this event on. Would that committee please stand? Just stand up. Just give them applause. We have two other individuals we should thank, and that's Beulah and Dorian. Those are the co-chairs. Thank those people. And as Jim stated, Vern and Donna Nelson, and Joe and Chuck Granger for having us here and hosting the food. I saw Donna here this morning decorating the tables. Let's give them a big round of applause. Now, let's have a little fun, a little reminiscing here. How many people here worked for Blacks, Donaldson's, etc., while they were in high school? If you did, please stand. Okay, we have a few. How many people here tonight worked while they were in college? Okay, we got a few here too. Okay, that's good. Now, I don't want to get into this in real depth because it's part of the program later on. But if you worked here over 5 years, please stand. You should get a lot of people up now. Okay. Now, either keep standing or sit down, 10 years. Okay, 15 years. Still got a lot standing here. 20 years. Okay, 25 years. 1, anybody? Lorraine, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We got a lot of them. Okay, now later in the program, I'm sure they're going to figure out who worked here the longest. I'll leave that up to them. Now, I worked for Bob Landis. He was the managing director while I was here. And of course, there were more managing directors before the store. Does anybody know who really ran this store? No? Number Bucky was one of them. I think it was Lorraine Nelson who really ran the store. That's my guess there. Now we're going to play a little game called I Remember When. And we have such a large group here, it's going to be a little cumbersome, but we'll try to get through it. Now, I'm going to give you an example of I Remember When. And I'm going back to Lyle Parker. And as we all know, Lyle worked fast, talked fast, walked fast. Everything was fast, fast, fast. We had a meeting up on one of the upper floors, and Lyle was just about late to the meeting. Now, he would never, ever be late to a meeting, so he was close. There were 2 rooms up there, and we were in the first room, and Lyle thought it was the second room. And you could hear him coming down the hallway, lickety-split. He quick looked in that first room, and his feet literally stopped dead. And he just slid. He's going like this, looking in, and slid right by the doorway. I have that impression in my mind to this day. I can see it as perfect as can be. Another example, I was in my office one day and I got a call from Women's Lingerie, and there was a gentleman there that wanted to try on women undergarments, and they didn't know what to do. Well, it turns out that this individual was going in to have a sex change, and he wanted to have his new undergarments to wear coming out of the hospital. So we pulled somebody else out of another department, and we had them watch the dressing room, and this gentleman tried the garments on and also purchased them. Now that was something real strange back in those days, but that's what happened. Now, this can be a little bit cumbersome, but let's go on with I Remember When, and I only want to take a few minutes doing this. So gather into just a couple groups, or maybe your table or a couple tables. Talk among yourselves. I'll give you just a few minutes, and remember a story or something you'd like to share with all of us. Pick a spokesperson, and then I'm only going to go 2 or 3 of you because we haven't got much time tonight. But pick a spokesperson. Will that person come up here and give me I Remember When? So take just a few minutes, get together, hash things out, and let's talk about it. He wanted to tell me the story, but not come up here, and I said that's a no-go. So we're going to start right over here with our first one, and you have about 2 minutes.
Well, we were agreed the time the this one? We were agreed the time the shoplifter jumped off of the balcony. Not once, but twice, eluded store security and escaped.
Thank you. Now that wasn't so hard. Okay, now we have the first table right over here. Their spokesperson will come up. Okay, that was a good one. This is when blacks in part of Waterloo had a 6-day blackout, and the store remained open with flashlights. And back in those days, Cedar Falls had their own municipal utilities, so So they had electricity during those 6 days, but parts of Waterloo didn't, so that's pretty neat. That's all I had to share with you. I'm sure we'll do more reminiscing as that goes on. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a lady that almost everyone here knows. She is a mountain of information. If you want to know anything about blacks, she's the one to call. Let's give a wonderful reception for one of our Easy Club members, Lorraine Nelson.
Well, Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Stiebel have pretty much taken a lot of what I was going to say, but this is what I have written. Being hired by Norma Butke, who had just assumed the position after Gertie had decided to be married. I was hired to be a cashier wrapper at Easter time in the ready-to-wear department. If you can imagine, nowadays you don't have any salesperson. In ready-to-wear dresses and suits, we had 6 ladies. We had 3 in coats. We had 4 in sportswear, even though that was just becoming popular. And we had 4 in furs. That was just the front end of the building. Then you still had the lingerie, housewares, millinery, and shoes, all on the same floor, as well as the offices in back. Mr. Patterson, Matt Patterson, was my boss in ready-to-wear. And the one thing I remember particularly about him was that he would go to New York several times a year with a whole handful of special orders. Each one of the clerks had their certain clientele, and like Mrs. Rath or Mrs. Miller or Mrs. Forsberg or Mrs. Alstead or whoever it happened to be, they would tell that they would want a dress for a special occasion for the spring, or if that was when he was going, or for the fall, whatever it happened to be. And he would go and pick that out. And he'd actually, nowadays, later years, they would just go and see the whole line and say, well, I want 12 of those or 10 of those. At that time, he said, I want that dress in blue, I want that dress in brown for somebody. And he always made sure that if the 2 ladies were in the same club, they did not have the same type of dress. It was completely different. So that was one of the things that I remember particularly about ready-to-wear. And of course, as cashier, my main position was taking care of the sales check, and at that time we had the vacuum tube system. And of course the red one had to go to the charge office, and the gray one had to go to the tube room, and the girls down there made the change and sent it back up to us. Of course, you had to be sure that you closed the cup, or otherwise the change went right out through them. When I was transferred to the office, Dick Shane was my boss. He was controller. Lucetta Wogan was the general ledger bookkeeper. Wilma Gates was statistical. Thelma Schwartz was sales audit. Irene McCormick was the head cashier, and Ralph Rundle was the credit manager. I was hired in the office to start out with the payroll. And some of it was in checks, and some of it we paid in cash. When we paid by cash, we had to order the specific coins from the bank so that we could fill the envelopes. And charge authorization was up in the credit department, and several girls took care of that. And the one thing about that was the sales checks would be stuffed behind the various customers' accounts. And then at the proper time in the month, it was billed, photographed, and sent back to the customer. But one day, the pipe overhead broke, water pipe. All that water came down on some of the records. What a mess. We had to try and sort it out, put it on the windowsills and all the desks and everything to dry out. The PBX was also up in the office. We had 2 operators, and it was the old-fashioned where you call, the calls came in and they connected you through the plug-ins to the various departments. Then, as was mentioned, 1957, the addition was built on to Park and Sycamore. Of course, that meant a lot of moving and redecorating and transferring. In the early 60s, like they said, the casual shop was moved from College Square to, or from Blackhawk Village to College Square, and then the Crossroads. And then we also moved the appliance, which was a separate building over here on Park Avenue, of which Ed Smith and Pete Kalinich and them would have, and then they went out to Home Store. And of course our delivery service at that time was Curly Barron, and you couldn't ask for, he always delivered. I don't care whether it was 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock. If the package had to be there, he got it there. The tea room became the Sky Room after we remodeled. And the main thing that we remember particularly there was the style shows that Evelyn Camerata and her associates put on every Thursday noon. The hubbub was always the day or two before when they tried to pick out the most latest arrivals in the ready-to-wear and then accessorize it with the newest purses, hats, gloves, shoes, everything, jewelry, everything, even to the hose. The hose had to be the right shades to go with it. All the shoes had to be taped on the bottom because you didn't dare sell shoes that showed that they were worn. So every shoe had to be taped on the bottom. All the dresses and stuff had to be pressed, which was the alteration department's job. After Christmas meant getting ready for inventory, and as Dick said, that was the big push. And in the office, it meant figuring the inventory, reconciling the figures, and getting that all done. And then the final sprint was to put all that information onto the Allied audit papers. Allied stores sent 170 some different audit papers, and they had to be reconciled to the general ledger. So there was every type of information cross-referenced from one to the other, back and forth, and that was a big job. I guess the final figures or sad experiences that I experienced was the day that I had to take the general ledger bookkeeping up to Minneapolis to Mr. Ahart. I had to take all my general ledgers, the latest Allied audit papers, and turn them over and discuss them with Mr. Ahart, who was the controller for Donaldson's. And I was up there for a full week just reconciling those other things. Another sad experience, of course, was when they put the Donaldson sign on the building. I really didn't appreciate it. This was supposed to be blacks, it was supposed to stay blacks. But as time progresses, you have to go along with the future. So then again, the final thing was the day that Greg Steibel and I had to lock this building for the last time after all the fixtures, debris, even including going up behind the elevator shaft on the 9th floor and behind, going down in the sub-basement, cleaning that all out and all that. Of course, over the years, there were various store managers, merchandise managers, buyers, non-supporting or non-salesperson, personnel directors, and so forth. Some of those I remember well. Of course, Matt Patterson, Dick Shane, Mr. Stiebel, Mr. Lawrence, and of course, Miss Norma Budke. I also remember Jimmy Burns, who was the first floor walker, and Pat Doherty, who met us at the door every single morning. All of these people, plus the supporting personnel, made Black's the great store we all remember, which was Black's Trade at Headquarters. It's safe. However, I did continue to work for Donaldson's and Carson Perry Scott, even going up to Minneapolis with the Donaldson store to help them reconcile their books. I did bring one remembrance. I don't know how many. One of you mentioned that we belonged to Allied Stores Corporation. In 1955, Mr. Puckett designed and made Allied's coat of arms. The A, I don't know, I know you can't see it from there, but we had an A, a red A on a silver background. The A represented courage, the background was the silver anniversary. The 6 white horsemen on the blue background represented the height of all the thunder of hoofs, and the thought of victory was always there. Then across the middle there was a band with a link of chains, and that was to represent that we were always together, never ending. The chain never started, the chain never ended. Then we had the Book of Learning, which represented that we were rich in knowledge and that countless words were a record of our past. And finally, we had the hand holding the electric bolt, and that was to keep on that action. Deeds are only born and they keep you going. That was our coat of arms. I now thank you for having me up here. I don't know how many of you remember Wayne Myers from the basement store. He said, Dear Mrs. Bride, my brother in Evansdale, Iowa, sent me a clip about the Blacks reunion. May I bend your ear for a few minutes? Sorry I can't attend in body, but I'll be with you all in spirit on that day. I was hired by Mr. Dick Bailey, sent to work for Mr. Dave Kinzinger on the 5th floor housewares. Then a year later was placed under Mr. Donahue in the basement store as a buyer and assistant. Lasted only 22 years. Must have been something right along the way. So many memories of so many fine people. Sure do think of the Sky Room, but was more at home with Lillian and Maddie in the coffee shop. I believe this to be true as far as fellow members. I finally became number 3 in service at this store, with Mr. Shane and Lyle with more years of service. My memories go back to many, many fine people, all through blacks. Agnes in the hosiery, Jessica and Candy in notions, Marge in the basement, and many other who have gone to eternal rest now. I had so many friends with all the employees. My 22 years sure went quickly. Please give my regards to anyone who remembers me. I live alone, going on 79 years young. Would welcome to hear from anyone or have them even stop in to see me, as I live in Las Vegas. A few still write to me. Dave Kensinger, for one, and a lady who worked in the basement with me. She's now 92 years young. Please do me a favor if you can and send a clip to Letha Belthus of Welcome, Minnesota. She was a very devoted salesperson, very alert, and remembers blacks as well as she writes to me. And I think Beulah has a letter from Letha.
Dear Beulah, in 1960 I seen an ad in the paper, blacks wanted part-time help for the Christmas season. I went down and Norma gave me a job. I'll never forget my first day at Blacks. I knew how to run a register, but had never made a change slip. Norma started me in the men's department in the basement, and it was $1 a day. When the doors opened, here comes the customers like a herd of cattle. Helena Freeland and whoever knows Norma gave me the new ones to train. I need help now and she was busy. I worked in domestics and slips and bras with Mildred White, Marge Hagestein, Joni Cole, and Val Gerholt, and some days in children's with Edith Hack. When they closed the downtown store, Wayne moved to Las Vegas, and we have always kept in touch. He never forgets to send me a Christmas card. I had a stroke a year ago, and my writing isn't too good. I hope you can make it out. I am 94 years young. I moved in 1995 to be near my daughter. I bought a house, also 1 floor, and steps except 2 to get in. We are 4 blocks apart. She comes and calls each day to take care for my groceries. I live alone. I have very fond memories of Blacks. Yours truly, Letha Belthus. Give a warm welcome to Debbie Benford.
Beulah talked me into this. It was really nice seeing everybody here tonight. I was really having a hard time though. I'm the one that, remember I did payroll and I was secretary and I knew everybody's name. I think I'm getting older because I couldn't remember everybody's name. But they pulled a trick on me because there was a few people here. I walked up to someone and they said, they were looking for somebody that worked here in the 40s. And I'm like, I wasn't even born then. So we have such a group here tonight. It's wonderful. When I started work here, I was, I think, 20. And I came from a farm in Wisconsin. And when I told them where I got a job after college, they said, they'd heard of it. And the more I talked to some of my relatives up in Wisconsin, we're talking up in Wisconsin, the northern Wisconsin, they'd even been to Blacks, and I'm thinking, this has got to be a good place to work, I mean, people know about this place. But I'll never forget the very first time I came in to interview for the job. And we all remember Norma Budke, right? She gave me this, how did she put it? We were looking for someone with a little experience. Well, I'd been to a few interviews and I thought, what the heck? I said, you know, if somebody doesn't give me a job, I'm never going to get experience. And I walked out of there and figured that was the end of that. But Norma hired me. So I did accounts payable, payroll for a while, and that's where I learned a lot of names. Does anybody remember, like, where you went and got your check? You know, it was like a cage, you know? I was like behind the cage. Every Friday, you know, I'd open that little door and you all would come. But of all the times and that I had people come to that window, I remember one like it was yesterday. And does anybody remember Dorothy Pierce? Well, you'll understand this when I start to tell you this. I'm this farm girl, okay, from Wisconsin, shy. She walks up and she says, would you like to hear a joke? And I'm like, okay. You know? She proceeded to tell me this quite shady joke. And I turned every red, I mean, I was pure red. And I was like, what in the world just happened? Dorothy became my absolute best friend. She was like my mom, the best. And I think there's a lot of relationships here, a lot of people that have got that family. We worked together, but we were family, you know? I run into people at Crossroads or anywhere, and it's such a, I don't know, it's like you feel like you're home or something. Even tonight, I feel like I'm in the store, you know? I mean, I remember this so well, you know? But anyway, I had to tell you that. If you want to know what the joke was, I still know it. So, you can see me later. I remember probably newer things than Lorraine, and I won't keep you very long. I remember Steve Frick. If anybody remembers, he wasn't here a long time. I had taken Alice Anders' position as executive secretary then, and I remember him walking up behind me, and he was looking down, and I was doing something for him, and he was very particular, real particular. And he said, does that typewriter have a half space? And I'm like, well, I'll check. I remember they had, Joyce Griffith was here for a little while, and we had the symphony and a fashion show, I think half the symphony. It was a pretty big thing. And I remember her coming to me and she said, why don't you handle the wine and cheese? And I'm like, you want me to handle the wine and cheese? And I don't know, just different things like that jump out at me. The other thing I remember is we did have a noon meeting every day. It was called Days of Our Lives. Did anybody? Well, you were probably at the other table. There was Days of Our Lives table, and then there was the other table. And I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I do. I remember working with Norma a lot. I remember working with Lorraine a lot. I learned so much from them. But I remember working with you. I remember just trying to help, trying to be a bridge. You know, when you needed know something about your insurance, and it was a little easier to ask me than Norma, and I tried to help in that way, and that's what I enjoyed. I still do that in my job now, and I still enjoy that. I think even though we've changed, and I'm going to quit because you guys probably know more about what went on here than I do, but I think we've all changed. But there's, you know, they took blacks away from us. I was with Sue Ashley. Lorraine was talking when they closed the store down here. Well, at Crossroads, that was the very end, and Sue Ashley was the store manager, and at that time I was the human resource manager of personnel, and I remember locking that door. I thought that to me was the end, because there wasn't even a little bit of blacks then. I mean, that was the very final. And they've taken blacks maybe away, but they'll never take our memories, will they? Thank you.